Chapter 21. The gardener's story concluded. It seemed as if science and thought had perished for all eternity, and that the earth would never again know peace, joy, and beauty. But one day, under the walls of Rome, some workmen, excavating the earth on the borders of an ancient road, found a marble sarcophagus which bore carved on its sides simulacra of love and the triumphs of Bacchus. The lid being raised, a maiden appeared whose face shone with dazzling freshness. Her long hair spread over her white shoulders. She was smiling in her sleep. A band of citizens, thrilled with enthusiasm, raised the funeral couch and bore it to the Capitol. The people came in crowds to contemplate the ineffable beauty of the Roman maiden and stood around in silence, watching for the awakening of the divine soul held within this form of adorable beauty. And it came to pass that the city was so greatly stirred by this spectacle that the Pope, fearing, not without reason, the birth of a pagan cult from this radiant body, caused it to be removed at night and secretly buried. The precaution was vain, the labor fruitless. After so many centuries of barbarism, the beauty of the antique world had appeared for a moment before the eyes of men. It was long enough for its image, graven on their hearts, to inspire them with an ardent desire to love and to know. Henceforth, the star of the God of the Christians paled and sloped to its decline. Both navigators discovered worlds inhabited by numerous races who knew not old Yahweh, and it was suspected that he was no less ignorant of them, since he had given them no news of himself or of his son, the expiator. A Polish canon demonstrated the true motions of the earth, and it was seen that, far from having created the world, the old demiurge of Israel had not even an inkling of its structure. The writings of philosophers, orators, jurisconsults, and ancient poets were dragged from the dust of the cloisters, and passing from hand to hand, inspired men's minds with the love of wisdom. The vicar of the jealous God, the Pope himself, no longer believed in him whom he represented on earth. He loved the arts and had no other care than to collect ancient statues and to rear sumptuous buildings wherein were displayed the orders of Vitruvius re-established by Bramante. We began to breathe anew. Already the old gods, recalled from their long exile, were returning to dwell upon the earth. They found once more their temples and their altars, Leo placing at their feet the ring, the 3 crowns, and the keys, offered them in secret the incense of sacrifices. Already Polyhymnia, leaning on her elbow, had begun to resume the golden thread of her meditations. Already in the gardens, the comely graces and the nymphs and the satyrs were weaving their mazy dances, and at length the earth had joy once more within its grasp. But, O calamity, unlucky fate, most tragic circumstance! A German monk, all swollen with beer and theology, rose up against this renaissance of paganism, hurled menaces against it, shattered it, and prevailed single-handed against the princes of the church. Inciting the nations, he called upon them to undertake a reform which saved that which was about to be destroyed. Vainly did the cleverest among us try to turn him from his work. A subtle demon on earth called Beelzebub marked him out for attack, now embarrassing him with learned, controversial argument, now tormenting him with cruel mockery. The stubborn monk hurled his inkpot at his head and went on with his dismal reformation. What ultimately happened? The sturdy mariner repaired, caulked, and refloated the damaged ship of the church. Jesus Christ owes it to this javelin that his shipwreck was delayed for perhaps more than 10 centuries. Henceforth, things went from bad to worse. In the wake of this lutish monk, this beer swiller and brawler, came that tall, dry doctor from Geneva, who, filled with the spirit of the ancient Yahweh, strove to bring the world back again to the abominable days of Joshua and the judges of Israel. A maniac was he, filled with cold fury, a heretic and a burner of heretics, the most ferocious enemy of the graces. These mad apostles and their mad disciples made even demons like myself, even the horned devils, look back longingly on the time when the Son with his virgin mother reigned over the nations, dazzled with splendors cathedrals with their stone tracery delicate as lace, flaming roses of stained glass, frescoes painted in vivid colors telling countless wondrous tales, rich porphyries, glittering enamel of shrines and reliquaries, gold of crosses and of monstrances, waxen tapers gleaming like starry galaxies amid the gloom of vaulted arches, organs with their deep-toned harmonies. All this doubtless was not the Parthenon, nor yet Panathenea, but it gladdened eyes and hearts. It was, at all events, beauty. And these cursed reformers would not suffer anything, either pleasing or lovable. You should have seen them climbing in black swarms over doorways, plinths, spires, and bell towers, striking with senseless hammers those images in stone which the demons had carved, working hand in hand with the master designers, those genial saints and dear holy women, and the touching idols of virgin mothers, pressing their suckling to their heart. For, to be just a little agreeable, paganism had slipped into the cult of the jealous god. These monsters of heretics were for extirpating idolatry. We did our best, my companions and I, to hamper their horrible work, and I, for one, had the pleasure of flinging down some dozens from the top of the porches and galleries onto the cathedral square, where their detestable brains got knocked out. The worst of it was that the Catholic Church also reformed herself and grew more mischievous than ever. In the pleasant land of France, the seminarists and the monks were inflamed with unheard of fury against the ingenious demons and the men of learning. My prior was one of the most violent opponents of sound knowledge. For some time, my past studious lucubrations had caused him anxiety, and perhaps he had caught sight of my cloven foot. The scoundrel searched my cell and found paper, ink, some Greek books, newly printed, and some panpipes hanging on the wall. By these signs he knew me for an evil spirit, and had me thrown into a dungeon, where I should have eaten the bread of suffering and drunk the waters of bitterness, had I not promptly made my escape by the window and sought refuge in the wooded groves among the nymphs and the fauns. Far and wide, the lighted pyres cast the odor of charred flesh. Everywhere there were tortures, executions, broken bones, and tongues cut out. Never before had the spirit of Eava breathed forth such atrocious fury. However, it was not altogether in vain that men had raised the lid of the ancient sarcophagus and gazed upon the Roman Virgin. During this time of great terror, when papists and reformers rivaled one another in violence and cruelty, amidst all these scenes of torture, the mind of man was regaining strength and courage. It dared to look up to the heavens, and there it saw, not the old Jewish drunk with vengeance, but Venus, Urania, tranquil and resplendent. The new order of things was born. Then the great centuries came into being. Without publicly denying the God of their ancestors, men of intellect submitted to his mortal enemies, science and reason. And Abbe Gassendi relegated him gently to the far distant abyss of first causes, the kindly demons who teach and console unhappy mortals, inspired the great minds of those days with discourses of all kinds, with comedies and tales told in the most polished fashion. Women invented conversation, the art of intimate letter writing and politeness. Manners took on a sweetness and a nobility unknown to preceding ages. One of the finest minds of that age reasoned, the amiable Bernier wrote one day to Saint Evremond, "It is a great sin to deprive oneself of a pleasure, and this pronouncement alone should suffice to show the progress of intelligence in Europe." Not that there had not always been Epicureans, but unlike Bernier, Chapelle, and Moliere, they had not the consciousness of their talent. Then even the very devotees understood nature, and Racine, fierce, begot that he was, knew as well as such an atheistical physician as Guy Patin how to attribute to diverse states of the organs and passions which agitate mankind. Even in my abbey, whither I had returned after the turmoil, and which sheltered only the ignorant and the shallow thinker, a young monk, less of a dunce than the rest, confided to me that the Holy Spirit expresses itself in bad Greek to humiliate the learned. Nevertheless, theology and controversy were still raging in this society of thinkers. Not far from Paris, in a shady valley, there were to be seen solitary beings known as les messieurs, who called themselves disciples of St. Augustine, and argued with honest conviction that the God of the Scriptures strikes those who fear him, spares those who confront him, holds works of no account, and damns, should he so wish it, his most faithful servant, for his justice is not our justice, and his ways are not, and his ways are incomprehensible. One evening I met one of these gentlemen in his garden, where he was pacing thoughtfully among the cabbage plots and lettuce beds. I bowed my horned head before him and murmured these friendly words: "May old Jehovah protect you, sir. You know him well. Oh, how well you know him, and how perfectly you have understood his character." The holy man thought he discerned in me a messenger from hell, concluded he was eternally damned, and died suddenly of fright. The following century was the century of philosophy. The spirit of research was developed. Reverence was lost. The pride of the flesh was diminished, and the mind acquired fresh energy. Manners took on an elegance until then unknown. On the other hand, the monks of my order grew more and more ignorant and dirty, and the monastery no longer offered me any advantage now that good manners reigned in the town. I could bear it no longer, flinging my habit to the nettles. I put a powdered wig on my horned brow, hid my goat's legs under white stockings, and cane in hand, my pockets stuffed with gazettes, I frequented the fashionable world, visited the modish promenades, and showed myself assiduously in the cafes where men of letters were to be found. I was made welcome in salons where, as a happy novelty, there were armchairs that fitted the form, and where both men and women engaged in rational conversation. The very metaphysicians spoke intelligibly. I, acquired great weight in the town as an authority on matters of exegesis. And without boasting, I was largely responsible for the testament of the Cure Mystere and the Bible Explained, brought out by the chaplains to the King of Prussia. At this time, a comic and cruel misadventure befell the ancient Jaffa. An American Quaker, by means of a kite, stole his thunderbolts. I was living in Paris and was at the supper where they talk of strangling the last of the priests with the entrails of the last of the kings. France was in a ferment. A terrible revolution broke out. The ephemeral leaders of the disordered state carried on a reign of terror amidst unheard of perils. They were, for the most part, less pitiless and less cruel than the princes and judges instituted by Yahweh in the kingdoms of the earth. Nevertheless, they appeared more ferocious, because they gave judgment in the name of humanity. Unhappy they were, easily moved to pity, and of great sensibility. Now men of sensibility are irritable and subject to fits of fury. They were virtuous. They had moral laws. That is to say, they conceived certain narrowly defined moral obligations and judged human actions not by their natural consequences, but by abstract principles. Of all the vices which contribute to the undoing of a statesman, virtue is the most fatal. It leads to murder. To work effectively for the happiness of mankind, a man must be superior to all morals, like the divine Julius. God, so ill used for some time past, did not, on the whole, suffer excessively harsh treatment from these new men. He found protectors among them. He was adored under the name of the Supreme Being. One might even go so far as to say that terror created a diversion from philosophy and was profitable to the old demiurge, in that he appeared to represent order, public tranquility, and the security of persons and property. While liberty was coming to birth amid the storm, I lived at Anatole and visited Madame Helvetius, where free thinkers in every branch of intellectual activity were to be met with. Nothing could be rarer than a free thinker. Even after Voltaire's day, a man who will face death without trembling dare not say anything out of the ordinary about morals. That very same respect for humanity, which prompts him to go forth to his death, makes him bow to public opinion. In those days, I enjoyed listening to the talk of Volney, Cabanisse, and Tracy, disciples of the great Condillac. They regarded the senses as the origin of all our knowledge. They called themselves ideologists, were the most honorable people in the world, and grieved the vulgar minds by refusing them immortality. For the majority of people, though they do not know what to do with this life, long for another that shall have no end. During the turmoil, our small philosophical society was sometimes disturbed in the peaceful shades of the Anatole by patrols of patriots. Condorcet, our great man, was an outlaw. I myself was regarded as suspect by the friends of the people, who, in spite of my rustic appearance and my frieze coat, believed me to be an aristocrat. And I confess that independence of thought is the proudest of all aristocracy. One evening, while I was stealthily watching the dryads of Boulogne, who gleamed amid the leaves like the moon rising above the horizon, I was arrested as a suspect and put in prison. It was a pure misunderstanding, but the Jacobins of those days, like the monks whose place they had usurped, laid great stress on unity of obedience. After the death of Madame Helvetius, our society gathered together in the salon of Madame de Condorcet. Bonaparte did not disdain to chat with us sometimes. Recognizing him to be a great man, we thought him an ideologist. like ourselves. Our influence in the land was considerable. We used it in his favor and urged him towards the imperial throne, thinking to display to the world a second Marcus Aurelius. We counted on him to establish universal peace. He did not fulfill our expectations, and we were wrong-headed enough to be wroth with him for our own mistake. Without any doubt, he greatly surpassed all other men in quickness of intelligence, depth of dissimulation, and capacity for action. What made him an accomplished ruler was that he lived entirely in the present moment. He had no thoughts for anything beyond the immediate and actual reality. His genius was far-reaching and agile. His intelligence vast in extent, but common and vulgar in character. Embraced humanity, but did not rise above it. He thought what every grenadier in the army thought, but he thought it with unprecedented force. He loved the game of chance, and it pleased him to tempt fortune by urging pygmies in their hundreds and thousands against each other. It was the game of a child as big as the world. He was too wily not to introduce old Iave into the game. Iave, who was still powerful on earth, and who had resembled him in a spirit of violence and domination. He threatened him, flattered him, caressed him, and intimidated him. He imprisoned his vicar, of whom he demanded, with a knife at his throat, that right of unction which, since the days of Saul of old, has bestowed might upon kings and restored the worship of the demiurge. Sung to Deumes, to him, and made himself known through him as God of the earth. In small catechisms scattered broadcast throughout the empire, they united their thunders, and a fine uproar they made. While Napoleon's amusements were throwing Europe into a turmoil, we congratulated ourselves on our wisdom, a little sad withal at seeing the era of philosophy ushered in with massacre, torture, and war. The worst is that the children of the century, fallen into the most distressing disorder, formed the conception of a literary and picturesque Christianity, which betokens a degeneracy of mind really unbelievable, and finally fell into romanticism. War and romanticism, what terrible scourges! And how pitiful to see these same people nursing a childish and savage love for muskets and drums. They did not understand that war, which trained the courage and founded the cities of barbarous and ignorant men, brings to the victor himself but ruin and misery, and is nothing but a horrible and stupid crime when nations are united together by common bonds of art, science, and trade. Insane Europeans who plot to cut each other's throats, now that one and the same civilization enfolds and unites them all. I renounced all converse with these madmen and withdrew to this village, where I devoted myself to gardening. The peaches in my orchard remind me of the sun-kissed skin of the Manants. For mankind I retain my old friendship, a little admiration, and much pity, and I await, while cultivating this enclosure, that still distant day when the great Dionysus shall come, followed by his fauns and his bacchantes, to restore beauty and gladness to the world and bring back the golden age. I shall fare joyously behind his car, and who knows if, in that day of triumph, mankind will be there for us to see. Who knows whether their worn-out race will not have already fulfilled its destiny, and whether other beings will not rise upon the ashes and ruins of what once was man and his genius. Who knows if winged beings will not have taken possession of the terrestrial empire. Even then, the work of the good demons will not be ended. They will teach a winged race arts and the joy of life. Now, one of the things that we see there, the key theme is an underlying spiritual involvement in the ways of this world. Now, Christianity, as opposed to religion itself, has said take off the natural man instead of maintaining and building up the natural man. It is said, it's said that no more philosophy. After those who wrote the New Testament, there was supposed to be no philosophy, according to biblical Christianity. Further philosophy was banned. I don't remember. There's like 2 verses that make it super clear, and there's not really anything refuting that biblically. But one thing I would say is I would not blame, it's like, first of all, Yahweh, we can translate that in so many different languages. But, some of the stuff in the Bible kind of, makes things sound a certain way. And, that's what this is being bounced off of. Is that undeniable aspect of it.